Welcome back to Derry Public Radio. Reporting from the basement of the Derry Civic Center, this is Ben Graham with the news. The latest in the missing persons case of famed author Stephen King. Mr. King's car was found by our very own C.M. Alexander in the woods near her rural Maine home. Local authorities came upon C.M. covered in blood and pushing the totaled vehicle deep into a pile of underbrush. When questioned as to why she was bloody and hiding evidence, C.M. explained that this was all simply a big misunderstanding and nothing to worry about. Thank goodness. Listeners, I am certainly proud to work with such a selfless hero. You're listening to Derry Public Radio.
This is Derry Public Radio.
Welcome back to Derry Public Radio, a bi-weekly Stephen King book club podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Joshua Kahn, alongside C.M. Alexander.
Hello, everyone.
And Benjamin Graham.
What up, constant readers?
Today we are tackling the second half of Misery, and we have C.M. leading our discussion today.
Thanks, Josh. First, a quick recap of the book so far. Paul Sheldon is a famous writer, and he gets into a car accident and is rescued by a former nurse and his number one fan, Annie Wilkes. Paul is in bad shape. His legs are shattered. He's addicted to powerful painkillers. And Annie has shown some pretty strong signs that she is unstable and dangerous. She's left Paul alone for extended periods of time. She's lost her temper and abused him. And she's made him burn his non-misery transcript and is essentially forcing him to write a new misery book just for her. And last episode, we left off with Annie buying Paul a typewriter so he can write the best misery novel yet. And he failed in his first attempt, and after an interesting conversation with Annie, he starts to get into it, and he realizes that misery's not dead after all. And so Paul and Annie fall into this routine, and things are kind of looking up because he finally has it figured out. And by it, I of course don't mean his escape, I mean the book, because his escape has taken a back burner to misery.
Mm-hmm. Which is, I think, the theme of the second half of the book. The novel kind of takes place of the pills as the most important addiction that is keeping Paul where he is.
Yeah, he knows that he has started down a path that he has to finish because there's just too much good stuff there.
And I don't know about you guys, but I am swept away right there with him with this novel.
I honestly wish that King had written like a compendium novel.
Yeah.
That's not the right word.
No, but
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Of just it released Misery's Return with Misery.
That would have been
because
really
I would have
cool.
read it. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, it does sound pretty crazy.
And this first chapter that we come back into ends on a pretty foreboding note. And it reminded me, oh yeah, Paul is in trouble. Like they've fallen into this routine, but things are not okay. And it was this line, then the rain came and things changed.
I read ahead. I thought that this chapter was what we were ending on with last episode. And so I came in so hyped, being like, whoa, this cliffhanger. And yeah, I came in so hyped and they're like, no, we're that's for next week's episode. So I have been sitting on this. And that's the entire second half of this book to me. Mm-hmm. It is, I could not put it down. At certain points, I had to walk away because I was physically ill. There's a point in this book near the end, the final part of the book, I was reading at one of my favorite coffee shops in town, and I had to set the book down and take a fucking Xanax because I was having a panic attack because this book is so intense.
I think our friend Ben needs help.
Well, that's well documented.
Every episode's kind of a cry for help. It seems like it's going to go so well, though, right away, because they have that routine. Like, she's making him great breakfasts, and like he's just cranking out pages, and she's loving it. And it seems like it's going to go well until she comes in one day just stone-faced.
I wrote in my notes, then she pulls a Margaret White.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
She 100%
Very
does.
reminiscent of Margaret White.
Yeah. She comes in one day, and it is a textbook depressive episode. Like last episode we talked about, I'd loved we could do a whole episode just trying to diagnose Annie Wilkes.
Mhm.
It's pretty obvious she's supposed to be like bipolar, I guess, and psychotic, obviously. But this is a standard depressive episode. She's covered in like food and goo and just stone-faced and doesn't care about anything.
No, and she comes into the room and she tosses the pills at him and she turns to leave and he goes, Annie, are you okay? And with no emotion, she just says, no. And then she starts to like pinch her lip until it bleeds and slapping herself.
twists.
Yeah, she leaves and he hears her
God.
from the other room slapping herself hard in the face. So she
It's
wasn't even doing
intense.
it like in front of him for his attention. She's just off in another room hitting herself, which was creepy.
This is something I wanted to talk about with you guys, because mental health is a thing that I feel strongly about. I'm dealing with my own problems, and I work with individuals in my day job, individuals with mental health problems, and I had some mixed feelings because, how do I put it? How did you guys feel about King's treatment of mental health in this book? I wanted to know if you felt it was exploitative in any way.
I feel like his treatment of the topic mirrored society's treatment of it, stigma. And we know statistically that people with mental illness are more often victims of crime than perpetrators. And so it's kind of easy to say, this lady's psychotic, she has all these mental health problems, so she's, going to hurt this guy, she's nuts, when that's not usually the case. And when was this book written? Again?
88,
Yeah,
I believe.
in the 80s. So I think we've come a long way since then, but we still have a long way to go still. That's kind of how I felt about it the whole time, which is why I did feel sympathy that you guys gave me a lot of shit for with her, in the first part and then again later.
Yeah, that's my question is how sorry do we feel for Annie versus how sorry does King want us to feel for Annie? Because there's a line later on in the book where Paul sees her and just for a split second he's like, oh, in this moment I see her as, someone who could have been just a person you see out on the street, except for all these terrible things that happen and these chemicals in her brain are wrong. And I understood in that moment. I was like, that's what CM was talking about. But also, she's not described sympathetically, like at all. She's described as a monster.
She is. And we're going to get to this in just a little bit, but she's a serial killer.
Also
And-
that.
Also, yeah.
Yeah,
I
and-
was waiting for that to be touched on, and you guys just went back and forth. I'm like, guys,
Well,
she's a goddamn maniac.
it's the added layer of that mental health issue, which makes you pause and think, okay, is this about someone who's struggling or is this about a serial killer? I choose to look at it like a serial killer because, same reasons that you talk for Ben. And I also, in my day job, like this is my night job. I also work with individuals who struggle with mental health.
Yeah, I just thought it was something I wanted to touch on because it's literally the only part of the book that made me stop and think, be like, it felt a little, of its time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, so Annie's been neglecting Paul, and he has to get himself into the wheelchair. He ends up writing part of the script longhand because he can't lift up the typewriter from the dresser by himself. He has to take some meds from his stash, and he wakes up with her sitting on the edge of his bed, like even more filthy than before, and she's holding a rat.
Jesus Christ,
And
this escalates so fast.
I had pet rats as a teenager. They're smart, clean, they make beautiful pets. They're
You're
wonderful.
so weird.
And Thanks,
I
Josh.
love it. I mean that in the best way. Who just offhandedly is like, I had pet rats. Not a big deal.
This scene bothered me a lot.
As scenes of animal cruelty tend to and are supposed to, it's kind of become a theme in the books that we've done.
We're never going to do Cujo.
Billy hitting dogs with his car.
Right.
The
It's
entirety of Apt Pupil. King has a thing for...
well, he knows how to prey on our vulnerabilities and our sympathies.
yeah. Well, and I think what also made this so shocking is that he just describes that she's holding like the rat trap with a rat in it. It's not until later, after she's been just standing there with it, that he mentions that it's alive. So I was just like, oh, it's a dead rat in a rat trap, and I didn't think anything of it. And then it like starts looking. It's like he sees it moving, and I'm like, oh god,
it's right
oh,
around
god, she's
that
been
time.
holding this live but back broken rat. And she like the fact that she has one of her space out moments in that time, and she just stares off for 3 minutes, just holding this rat and just staring off into nothing. I can only imagine being Paul in that instance of like being so terrified of what she was gonna come back to.
And she does this, and then she ends up squeezing the rat to death, and it's like, Paul is that rat. I mean, I know that's a real easy one, but
yeah, she says, well, in the mental process of Annie Wilkes, we're all the rats. Is we're all just stuck in this terrible life, and Annie offers to solve the problem for him.
yeah, she basically offers to kill them both and end it all right there. And he says, not until I finish.
And it's so casual.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I know that writing the book is his only leverage with her, but I couldn't help but equate writing the book to the addiction, like you said, Ben, earlier, to the pain meds. And I know that he didn't mean that all he wants to do is finish. He doesn't not care about, living, because he obviously does have a strong desire to live. But I felt like maybe there was some small secret part of him that did mean it that way.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that it's his new addiction. You're right. I feel like there are moments where later on that he kind of acknowledges, I could do more to be getting out of here, but I mean, what's the point? I'm cranking out a bunch of pages. Like, I don't have time to like plan some escape. Like, this stuff's coming, and when you're writing, you don't want to hit that writer's block. So he's just gonna move through. Whatever.
And here's a crazy thing. When I was taking notes on this second half on my phone, was taking notes about the links between writing and story, specifically as addiction. And I went to type novel, the name of the narcotic that he's addicted to, and my phone auto-corrected it to novel.
Oh, so
Whoa.
Deep cut.
Yeah.
I like that also in that scene, his I didn't write down the quote about his depressives versus psychotics, of like a depressive will kill themselves, a psychotic, because of their poison ego, will do everyone else a favor and take them with them when they go. Like, that's I mean, I am aware that I'm an egomaniac, but I have never once had that kind of inclination. But
and the ego of Annie Wilkes is so...
It's insane.
The part where he says, he's trying to reason with her or sympathize with her. And she says, I understand, we all get this way sometimes. I mean, it's been rainy and I've been in a lot of pain too. And she turns to him and says, you don't know anything about pain, Paul. His legs are shattered. And the fact that she 100% believes that her life is the worst.
Yeah.
So, it's as much as I was like trying to be sympathetic and trying to reach the level of sympathy that Saint CM has. Things like that just get me so much and make Annie the amazing villain she is.
And this is when she goes to her laughing place.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yes. And she tells him, so she offers to kill them both again.
Mhm.
And he's like, no, I want to finish this. You
No, I'm
want to
good.
finish this. and even though she's in this terrible state, there's a part of her that acknowledges that yes, I do want to know. And I know that I'm having this episode. And so I have to leave basically so I don't kill you, so I don't do something terrible. And she tells him, I have a laughing place. And then she says sometimes she laughs when she goes there, but mostly she screams.
For fuck's sake.
If I was Paul, that is when I would have started to scream.
Yeah.
This is when it gets interesting. She abandons him. She goes to her laughing place. And Paul has to escape his room again. And so he's...
For the second time.
Yes, for the
That's
second
important.
time. And
Thank
he
God
goes
for
out...
Mr. Picklocks.
Oh my God. So he goes out into the house, and it is just as much of a mess as Annie herself is. He decides that he's going to go to the front door. There are these 3 kind of high-tech locks on it. He can't get out that way. He goes to the kitchen door, same thing. He briefly considers burning the house down, but realizes he'd likely die too. And he wheels across the parlor, and a scrapbook catches his eye, and it says Memory Lane on it. And I wrote down all of the things in Memory Lane if we want to go through.
Yes, let's
It's
take a trip.
lot.
Okay.
It is a lot. 'Cause this
Strap
segment,
in.
All right. And then
It
I'm not
goes
going to
on
talk
for
after
a-
this.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure we'll have plenty to say after we go through all this.
Okay, so he opens the scrapbook Memory Lane. He opens a scrapbook Memory He opens a scrapbook, and this is what he finds.
nailed it.
You're gonna have to do that one more time. I was not expecting you to bail out on that. All right.
Paul starts going through this scrapbook, and here's what he finds. First, Annie's parents' nuptials. Annie's brother, Paul's birth announcement. Annie's birth announcement. Newspaper clipping. 5 die in apartment house fire. Bakersfield accountant dies in a freak fall, which is Annie's dad. USC student dies in a freak fall, Annie's college roommate. And these are all newspaper clippings. That one also included a poisoned cat. Annie's nursing school graduate announcement. Then we have our first obit for an elderly patient who died in a hospital in New Hampshire where Annie worked. Then 6 more, all elderly patients except the last one who was 46. That's all from 1969. Then we have a paper in Pennsylvania announcing new staff. One is Annie. That's in 1970. 2 obits for elderly patients and 1 for a child who had an accident and a grievous head injury. And she keeps moving west. People keep dying. Then in 1978, Denver, the one she mentioned, we have an obit, then a wedding announcement for Annie and Ralph. That's in 1979. And Ralph looks just like Annie's father, Paul notes. The obits stop for a while. Then there's a clipping from a realtor's sheet of the house, the one that Paul's in, and it seems that she stopped killing around the time she met Ralph. Then a divorce announcement on the grounds of mental cruelty, and the divorce was initiated by Ralph. Then we have the Boulder, Colorado paper with more than 30 obits from 81 to 82. And then she's named as new head maternity nurse. You know where this is going. 15 days after that headline, nursery deaths begin, 8 of them. Then a headline that she's questioned in the infant deaths. Then a headline that she's released, followed by a headline for 3 more infant deaths. Then Annie is arrested, goes to trial for the murder of 8 children. And this article also noted that some of Annie's victims lived long enough to be given names. Thanks, Stephen King. Then we have other documents from and following the trial. Goes to jury in the winter of 82. There's a photo of Annie in her cell reading one of Paul's misery novels. 3 days later, she's found innocent. Next article, Sidewinder, Colorado paper, 1984. Mutilated and partially dismembered remains of young man found in the wildlife preserve. It's near Annie's house. Then, now this is the biggie. Then we have a headline from Newsweek that's 2 weeks old. Paul Sheldon missing.
That article is the thing I love about it is that it's just so cold and disconnected. Like, it's just like, oh, nobody knows where he is. In other news, let's move on.
Mm-hmm.
It's where he's in his head. These people are like searching for him desperately. He thinks that his agent must be frantic looking for him, and it doesn't seem like anybody gives a shit.
Yeah, like one person says something about, I hope he comes around. Like they think he's purposefully hiding out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it made me wonder about Paul's life outside of the events of this novel.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't know a ton about it. We know that he's a famous author. We know he's been divorced twice, I believe.
Yep.
And there's some section of the novel where he's talking about how clean he's living now that he's at Annie's house.
Right.
Because he doesn't even smoke, because the one time he asked for a cigarette, Annie like got her scary face on. But there's a quick throwaway line of if he was at home, he'd be waking up to ladies left and right.
Right.
And like when this article is like, his agent's like, yeah, he's probably fucking somewhere. It made me think of like, people don't give a, Paul doesn't have a ton of friends.
Yeah,
he
his
must
life
not
seems-
be the best.
His life seems very shallow, and
Yeah.
he's clearly up his ass about the things that he writes, because he thought Fast Cars was the most amazing thing, and he looks down on his fans that love Misery. Like it's clear that he is just shallow and not a good person. Can I make one note that while reading that entire list of all the stuff that was in her scrapbook, I literally made a note when it said she became the head of the maternity ward. I just wrote, "Oh no."
Yeah.
And as I'm going through my notes now, I saw "oh no," and it immediately was like, I remember exactly what "oh no" means. There's so many disturbing things in that scrapbook.
She's sees herself as an angel of death.
Angel of
almost.
mercy.
Yeah, angel of mercy, yeah. Because she sees all of these people as beyond hope. They're poor, poor things. Paul says at one point, everyone in the world falls into one of three categories: brats, poor things, and Annie Wilkes. And
It's the most perfect summary.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, and the poor things deserve to die.
Yeah, she's just helping him out.
Ooh.
Oh, okay. So when you guys do it, it's okay. When I do it, I'm creepy.
No one's saying we're not being creepy.
All right. So it's this article that kind of gets Paul going. He's finally, I think, seriously planning his escape. And he goes through a number of more scenarios in his head. And he finally settles on hiding a kitchen knife under his mattress. He falls asleep. And here I'm thinking, okay, Paul's going to get out of this. He's going to stab her. There's going to be like this epic fight, but it's going to be okay. And he wakes up to the sting of a hypo in his arm and Annie looming over him. And she asks him what he wants first, the good news or the bad news.
That is not a question I would ever want Annie to ask me.
That is interesting. There's an alternate version of this story where Paul kills Annie at this point in the book. And I think that would be just as interesting. Because imagine the rest of this story playing out. He murders Annie. And then what? Then he's just stuck in this house.
Then we have that's Gerald's game.
Yeah, I was just about to say that's Gerald's game right
Gerald's game.
The good news. Well, what do you guys want first? Good news or bad news?
I
the
always
good news,
want the good
certainly.
news.
Okay. She got rid of his car.
Thank
no
God.
one's going to find his car and come rescue him.
Don't got to worry about that anymore.
The bad news is that she found all of the broken threads around her house and she knows he's been out. She knows he looked at memory lane, which she actually is pretty pleased about.
Well, she says, I left it there. Like, she knew what she was doing because she knew he could get out. But the thing that's insane is when she mentions him being upstairs.
Yeah, let's talk about the threads around the house.
Sure.
What she means by that.
Yeah. So she plucked hairs from her own head and like put them across like the bindings of the book or on doors. Or I think she mentions the one in like the one in her bedroom's like a dresser drawer, I think, something like that. And he, in his internal monologue, is basically like, I can't explain to her right now that like whatever was holding them on like could have just fallen off, that these hairs could have been broken forever ago. And that's the thing that makes this extra strength terrifying. Because in a lot of like horror movies or anything, you have that moment of like, man, if they just played by the rules, they'd be fine. But if Paul had never left his room one time, she would still do what's about to happen because those things broke upstairs. So she knows. And he never could possibly have done that.
That's why I said the number of times he got out. He says he left the room while she was gone 4 times.
He's been out 3 times
Three
total.
times. And he tells her that. She's like, how many times have you been out? He says, you know what? You caught me. I've been out 3 times. I had to. I had no other choice. And she's like, no, that's impossible. I know how many. And he says, fine. How many times have I been out, Annie? And she's like, 12. She just picks a random number. And there's no convincing her otherwise. And that is absolutely terrifying.
I was freaked out. When he was yelling back at her, I was like, Paul, oh God, cool it, buddy. Yelling at Annie has never gone well for anyone.
Yeah.
Well, he's also tripping his balls off.
That's also true.
Because she gave him his pre-op shot, which she mentioned. So he's like, pre-op, what the hell do you mean by pre-op? And he's like screaming at her, I've been out as many times as you want me to have been out. If you say it's 500, then I've been out 500 times, Annie. So let's talk about Annie hobbling Paul.
The scene.
The scene of misery.
There are movies and books where when you mention it, everyone thinks of the scene. This is the scene of this book.
I've never read the book. I've never seen the movie, but I knew this was coming.
Yep, same. I knew it was different, and in the book it was worse.
Yes.
So I was like preparing myself, and as she pulls out the axe, the propane torch, and the betadine swabs, like, and that he to this day remembers all of the brand names on them, like they're burned in his memory, and she says that she has to hobble him for both their sakes. This is for the benefit of both of them that she's doing this. And so she puts the betadine on his ankle and
on the axe
and on the blade of the axe, which he said it's rusty also, like the axe looks like it has some rust and stuff on it. And then says, "Don't worry, I'm a trained nurse," and chops his foot off with an axe. And then
a moment of silence.
a moment of breathe it in.
It's still stressful to talk about it.
And like I love that when he like tries to pull his leg up, he sees that all he did was make the opening wider for her because his foot didn't move anymore. And she chops through the rest of the foot and the mattress and very unceremoniously discards of the foot.
Yeah, and she has there's this moment on her face that he says, like, it's the same look she had when she had burned the script and ashes and like sparks flew all over the room, where it's childlike. She's not truly there. She has not thought this plan through in any way. She's just like, oh, well, this is obviously the only option I have. And then she goes through with it, and there's repercussions of this is major trauma, and he could easily die from this. And there's this moment of panic, this childlike look on her face of like, oh no, look what I've done. Oops, Annie made a boo-boo. And it's so terrifying.
And she's just like, she's like explaining like, well, there's no choking point to tourniquet this, so I'm gonna have to burn it shut. I'm gonna have to cauterize this wound. Hits the blowtorch and just burns his stump until it stops bleeding. And He passes out.
He dives back into the haze.
I wish he would have passed out when she pulled the axe out.
So that we wouldn't have to read what happened.
Sparing me from
All
the
right.
scene.
This is a little off topic, but you know what makes this scene hilarious?
I would love to hear, because I can't think of anything.
So a friend of mine who'd read this, apparently somebody told him, so he told me to do it. Go back and read that scene, but read all of Annie's dialogue out loud in a transatlantic accent.
Don't worry, I'm a nurse.
No time to suture. I'm gonna have to burn this thing shut. It was. I'm doing this for us.
Jesus.
Fucking. No, it was so good. It just made me laugh.
Well,
and I wanted to share that moment with you guys.
Podcast canceled, because I'm going to read every book from now on where every character just talks like that.
Oh,
I can
man.
never read again. Thanks, Josh's friend.
I'm sorry, man.
All right, now we come to part 3. So we end on this gruesome, upsetting scene, and we come back to Paul, and he's using his typewriter. You know, some time has passed. He's been fighting this infection. He's recovered enough that he started typing again, and the letter T just came off.
This is literally my favorite part in the entire book.
Do it, man.
Oh, yeah.
The formatting of this is so genius, because we come back, it's part 3, and the first bit is we immediately jump back into Misery's return. So immediately we know, well, Paul survived. I mean, obviously, would have been a really crazy book if
That was the end.
main character died 3/4 of the way through. But we know that he's writing again. The ends are missing, because at some point when Annie left the first time after she had found out that he could get into his chair all on his own, she said, hey, if you can do that on your own, then fill in your own fucking ends.
Yeah.
Dropping the only F-bomb Annie drops in the book.
Did you guys think, go Annie?
No!
Yeah, me neither.
No, I didn't either.
No.
I
Not
thought that
at
was
all.
bad. So he's typing the book, and the ends are missing. So there's just that little bit of struggle reading this part where you're filling in the ends. And then the very last line of this chapter, you're reading it, or at least this is how I read it. I was reading it, and then suddenly I can't read it anymore. And I'm like, wait, I can't, what are these words even supposed to be?
Mhm.
And then it goes to the next chapter, and it's Paul typing, and he has the same where he's typing, and then he stops. He's like, wait, what? And he picks up the typewriter, and the T falls out. And I thought that was the most brilliant piece of writing in this entire book. How it made you feel connected to Paul's state of mind, and how the book itself is falling apart.
Yeah. That's a really good perspective on that.
I
like that a lot.
I loved that. Anyway, continue.
Now go back and read it in a transatlantic accent.
My teeth fell out.
And he's also, as he's going through this, the E falls out. So he's missing an N, a T, and an E.
And a thumb.
Yeah, and that is almost casually, the first mention of it is so casual. It's like, oh, it's summer now, missing a foot, missing a thumb. The T fell out, but I can't ask Annie for a new typewriter because, you know, she's going to take off another body part if I do.
Yeah.
I was like, did I miss something?
I know,
The way
I
he
did
just
too.
casually is like, well, no thumb.
Yeah, it's the sudden shift. Like I said, the second half of this book, everything escalates so fast. And where it comes back from this horrible act, and the first thing we know is that was terrible, but it is now even worse in who knows how, we don't know how much time has passed, and he is broken. He is as broken as the typewriter, because he says, you know, an older or a younger Tom Sheldon, you know, Paul Sheldon a few months ago would have asked Annie.
Mm-hmm.
He makes it he says I should ask you for a new typewriter. That's hilarious, me.
Yeah.
As though yeah, even earlier he would have. And now it's just haha, that's never going to happen.
And what is the Annie logic behind him losing his thumb?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I don't remember actually.
Because that whole thing just felt so jarring because I was not expecting another maiming. And so I blanked that out, I guess.
And this is part of the reason he's not going to complain about the typewriter, because he didn't necessarily complain about it, but he made some sort of offhand remark. He kind of bitched about it a little bit.
About the dead sound of hit, because he kept hitting the N.
Yeah.
And he was annoyed by the dead sound it made. And that was
that was
great.
Bye thumb.
Fucking A. And just takes a knife and
electric knife.
Yeah, electric carving knife.
It
gets worse because she comes back with it on a birthday cake.
Fuck.
Yep.
I think I actually did block out parts of this last portion of the book because I fucking completely forgot about that.
Because she said if he was good, that he could have some cake and not have to eat
his
the special
thumb.
candle. The special candle.
Do you have any more Xanax, Ben?
I do, actually.
I might need some.
Xanax party. Ugh.
All right. Annie and Paul fall into another sort of routine, an uneasy peace, I guess.
Yeah.
And then an officer comes driving up. Let's talk about what happens with the officer. It's horrible. It's one horrible moment right after another in this.
It does actually have one of my favorite parts of this book is when he throws
ashtray.
He throws the ashtray through the window and can't think of anything to yell and just yells Africa.
Yeah,
because we're in Paul's head. That reference makes sense. But imagine being that police officer and you're just looking around. It's all quiet. All of a sudden, window shatters. Africa.
So this officer sees Paul and he pulls out the picture of Paul and he recognizes, okay, this is the guy I'm looking for. And then comes along Annie,
who, wielding a giant wooden cross that she used to mark her cow's grave from the time earlier when she was gone and she let a cow explode. Presumably.
That's not worth going into.
She drives it into his back, knocking him to the ground, then picks it up and jabs it into his stomach, and then back into him, I think 6 more times, and then just this giant cross casually just tosses it over her shoulder and walks away. And I was like, oh, all right, that's fucked up. That's it. All right, cop's dead. Cop's not dead.
Poor Officer Kushner.
Oh, God. He crawls back to his car, and then all of a sudden, Annie reappears on her lawn boy. And the cop drops his gun, and he reaches for it, and she runs over his hand and the gun with her lawnmower. Then she runs over his head.
The description of Paul seeing, the shredded tatters of his shirt mixed in with the blood that sprays all over the goddamn lawn.
And then he says he envies the cop.
Yeah. Which
I was like, oh, man. To think that you just watched that and there's a part of you that's like, man.
Must be nice.
Exactly.
And it gets interesting here because this is where Paul realizes that he's running out of time and that he needs to kill Annie before she kills him. And so you're thinking, okay, he's finally serious about this. He's finally serious about escape. But then 2 state troopers, Wilkes and McKnight, come looking for Kushner shortly after all of this happens, and they question Annie. Paul does not try to get their attention because first, he has to finish Misery. Second, he has to kill Annie himself.
I respected the fuck out of that. That was great.
How much of that is justification to himself? Because, I wouldn't blame him for not wanting to yell. He says, one of these cops looks big and tough as hell. He calls him David and Goliath.
Yeah.
He thinks about yelling, And he's like, there's a chance they could get the drop on her.
But he notices the other one has his jacket buttoned up.
Yep.
So he'd have to unbutton his jacket to get to his gun.
Yeah,
I can see
so like, yeah, you have to wonder how much of it is it's a combination of the novel and just 100%
Well, after what he did
primal fear.
after what she did to one cop,
Yeah.
like he knows how fast she is and how strong she is.
She's almost like inhuman.
Yeah.
Like this monster.
She's the goddess.
Yeah.
She's immortal and solid.
Oh God, that just rocked my brain for a second.
Oh, I didn't even mean to this time.
Only because it just connected those two things to me, that how Annie is at the beginning. Annie is this disgusting, gross golem that is, just rock solid Annie through and through. And by the end, she's the goddess. Like the transition that she has made in his head. That's just, I didn't even think about that until you just put those things back to back.
And it's a really tense scene, too, because the cops come into the house. Paul can hear them talking, and they're questioning her. And the elaborate story that she comes up with about Kushner and the details she gives, it's just so gross.
To the point where she
perfect.
had put his fingerprints on a can of Pepsi and then driven down the road and thrown it on the side of the road, which is half brilliant and half just insane, because like they're not going to find just a random can of Pepsi.
But what if they did?
But like in Annie's mind, everything is so absolute that she's like, well, yeah, of course that'll get him off my back.
Yeah, everything is very black and white for her.
Meticulous,
Oh, yeah.
but also really bonkers.
Well, and when she had to get rid of the first cop's stuff, she took Paul down to the basement and just basically left him down there and explained her plan to, I'm gonna take the car to my laughing place, and I'm gonna throw the body here, and I'm gonna do all this stuff. And as she's laying out that plan that she has had minutes to come up with, because this has all just been happening and she's been cleaning, it is fucking perfect. It's a great plan.
And as terrifying as being left alone in this dark basement with the rats for who knows how long, it is where Paul comes up with his plan.
Yes.
Because in the basement, just within arm's reach, he finds a can of lighter fluid.
Yep.
And when Annie comes back and takes him back upstairs to his room, he has it tucked down the back of his pants for later.
Yep. Just like Shawshank.
Listen, listeners. Send me a can of lighter fluid. Anyway, that's a deep cut. But actually, weirdly enough, not the only time that Paul has made me think of Andy Dufresne throughout this book. Is that just me? Because his, as bad as things get, he still has that drive to live.
He didn't remind me of Andy at all.
only because
I respect your right to think of Andy.
yeah, if it's like Andy, if Andy lost his unbreakable will. The character defining thing about Andy.
Fair.
I think Ben loves Andy the most.
It's I don't know. Maybe it's after years of reading King, I'm just conditioned to look for connections where they don't exist.
That's fair.
All right. Paul finishes his book. And I mentioned this in the first episode. You guys gave me infinite shit for it. And I know this is really horrible, but this is where I felt sorry for her, because Paul finishes and Annie is so, so excited. And she's going to get champagne. And you see like this a glimpse of this relationship. Like they could be friends or they could be lovers. And, she could be his wife celebrating, oh, you finally finished your book, this
Yeah.
supportive person, which is not at all how their relationship has been in any way. She gets a champagne. She's coming back, and Paul has a special surprise for her.
He asks her ahead of time if he can have just one cigarette, because it's his tradition that when he finishes writing a novel, he just likes to celebrate with a cigarette. And she doesn't like it, but they both have this like, I don't have to worry about lung cancer though, do I? That's not going to kill me. And I love that he brings it up and Annie's just like, oh yeah.
Good point. We're all going to be dead soon. Whatever.
So he's got this plan and he has his cigarette. She only gave him one match, which also was intense because it's an all or nothing deal here. And he pulls the lighter fluid out from under the floorboard where he's hidden it. She comes in the room and he has poured all of the lighter fluid over the manuscript of Misery as it's sitting there on the table.
Which he has spread out in a pile with the title page just perfectly positioned, which I thought was a great touch.
And she had, been making him fill in his own ends, so she is not up to date with the book.
Yeah, she's
going to be finishing the book.
He had said, Annie, I would really like it if you would just wait for it all to be over.
Yeah.
And so he strikes the match. She walks in and she sees it, and he goes, "It's a great book." And then drops the match and sets it on fire. And it was so badass.
So satisfying.
Oh, and she runs in to grab the book and like try to like put it out and pick up pages.
Is literally like grabbing burning paper with
reaching
her
into
bare
fire.
hands.
And he throws the royal at her and knocks her on her stomach and onto the shards of the broken bottle of champagne that she dropped the moment she saw the match fall. So
I loved the visual of she comes and she grabs all of this burning paper with her hands and then kind of like looks around like, what now? And he says something along the lines of like, I imagine she was thinking of maybe taking him and putting him in the bathtub or something. And I enjoyed that visual of she's like her not thinking things through.
Sure.
She is in this moment. The book is the only thing that has kept her alive for months.
The book is her trapped child under the car, and she's lifting the car.
Mm-hmm.
But then is my favorite
part. That is tragic. That makes me feel a little.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes. Not just me, listeners.
I have feelings. Anyway.
So this is of this entire end sequence, this is my favorite part. So Annie is on the ground on fire and she tries to get up, falls over again. And Paul climbs on top of her, grabs burning paper and starts shoving it in her mouth and like just taking on fire paper and shoving it down her throat piece after piece. And then tell her when she like throws him off and she gets up and he looks and her throat is completely swollen and blackened because it's burning from the inside. Ugh.
I don't know
and
how.
she still comes in.
She's dead.
How is she surviving that? And she also hits her head when she falls on something, right?
Once she gets up from that, she goes after him again, trips over the typewriter and cracks her head on the mantle. And that's when I was like, she's dead. All right. Whew, we're safe. And so he puts out the fire because he realizes if the house burns, he will die. And goes to crawl back to his chair. Guess what? Annie's not dead. She starts crawling after him. And I think, doesn't he say something like she reaches to grab him and had his foot bend there?
Yeah, yep.
Had she not chopped off his foot, she would have had him.
It's so scary. It's this whole sequence is the part where I was like, I need to calm down because it's so intense.
Yeah.
You can feel that feeling of like a dream. Where you're trying to run from something's after you, and you're trying to run, and that dreamlike feeling of not being able to run away. Him crawling across the floor through broken glass on his shattered legs away
With
from
his
this
burnt hands.
and away from this monster. Like, she's horrible, burned, and like gasping and making these. It's so primally terrifying. It's great.
Oh yeah. And he gets out of the room and he makes it to the bathroom to get more pills and passes out.
Yeah, he slams the door behind her and locks it.
Yeah.
And her fingers poke out from beneath the door, and he like pokes them back in. Like, no.
No, we're not doing this. But the moment where he's like, when he wakes up and he is for certain she's right on the other side of that door. Like that she's like on her way to him or something.
But the terrifying part that we find out is that she's not on the other side of that door because she is not in the house.
Yeah.
When he wakes up.
God.
Wilkes and McKnight, the two
David and
officers
Goliath.
from earlier, David and Goliath, come back and they find Paul and Annie is not there. And we don't find out until like towards the very end of the book when he's back in New York and we're figuring out, how he's recovering from this, that she had made her way out to the barn to get, was it the shotgun or something?
Chainsaw.
Oh, oh yeah.
Yeah, she had her
Way
hand
worse.
on the chainsaw.
And that's where she finally died.
Oh God.
And yeah,
can you imagine?
This whole when he's in the bathroom, it goes back to the first half of the book where it's his imagination. The thing that makes him a writer is the thing that's almost his worst enemy, because his imagination is so vivid. He can see her on the other side of the door just waiting for him. And when he leaves the bathroom to try and find a way out, he keeps turning and expecting her to jump up from behind a couch and come after him, but she's not there. And that brings us when the cops show up and save him. And he grabs the penguin statue and throws it out of the window and says, help me, and he gets saved. We reach the epilogue where it continues, where we don't, like you said, we don't know what happened. We just, he says, she's in there. She's in the bedroom. And he's emaciated. Sorry, I'm all over the place right now, but can we talk about what he looks like?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to lose my train of thought, but that's okay. Because when the cops come in, they break down the door and they find him, and it goes to the cops' point of view for a short bit, and them describing how he looks. I hadn't thought of how Paul looked through all this. Had you guys?
No, not at all. And except for when he described his legs. The first time. That's the only time I've really ever addressed.
I did kind of, because he had talked about how he was lifting the typewriter to work, keep his arm strong, and she had been feeding him. So I was surprised by the scene because I didn't expect him to look as bad. I expected him to be injured and his hands to be burnt, but it seemed like she was taking some sort of care of him. But then we kind of find out even what little care she was giving him was like, it was Annied.
Yeah, he was emaciated, and I can just imagine him with like a big bushy castaway beard and like just disheveled. I thought that was interesting. What was I talking about?
I think the point you were making, was that when he's back in New York at this point, we still don't know where Annie went, what happened to her. We just know she was gone, and he's having, understandably, a lot of problems. He's really struggling. He still kind of sees Annie everywhere. He has visions of her finding him and attacking him. And that's when we find out later that she died in the barn.
He walks into his apartment and she leaps from behind the couch and cuts his head off. And he then wakes up. Yeah. Like, it is presented to us in the book as though it happened. Like, we see it through his eyes. We see it's just like her in the hallway with the shotgun. We don't know that she's dead, and she jumps out and chops his head off. And he describes looking at her as his head rolls away. And then it's like a chapter break. And then he's like, yeah, but that didn't really happen.
But in his severed head moment, the last thing he thinks is goddess.
Ugh.
But like, and this is almost a year later.
Mm.
So I mean, not to say like that. He should be over it. Like, no, that's insane.
Oh,
but it's like still so much time has passed. We find out that his legs had to be rebroken just to have a chance at walking. And again, if he's like, if she hadn't cut off his foot, he'd never walk normal but now that he has a prosthetic foot, he can actually walk with a cane.
Yeah, she did him a favor.
She did him a real solid. She did say that she had to hobble him for both their sakes.
Yeah.
So Annie's right
she
again.
She was never wrong. The whole book.
I take it back. Annie's truly the hero of the book.
She's the real hero. So
Fuck.
He's clearly got his PTSD, but he also notes that he still has a drug addiction from everything that happened, and now it's presented that he has alcoholism also,
and writer's block,
and it's just such a. It looks like it's going to be such a depressing end to what should be such a a harrowing tale of survival, but then at the very end he writes.
He finds a new story.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That the note that I think that's what it says in the book is that can you, and he can and he will, and he cries because he finally can. Mm-hmm. And that's still a really dark ending, mm-hmm. because just because he can write again does not mean that things are gonna turn out any better than what his life is now. But to have that one little thing back is huge. Oh, yeah. And we glossed over it that Misery's Return, he got it published because he didn't actually burn the copy of Misery's Return. He hid it under the bed, and what he burned was just like his scrap paper and stuff. So he went back in there and got his copy of Misery's Return and got it published.
Yeah. Again, because misery was as important as life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Before we get to our ratings, I want to bring up two things. One thing we completely glossed over. It's a very small part of the book, but in Annie's memory lane, it is mentioned that there's a young hiker that was found hacked to bits with an axe. He was an artist traveling the country that Annie picked up. And while he was staying with her, he mentions the reason he was traveling through Colorado is he was heading to the ruins of an old hotel that had exploded several years before.
Was it overlooking anything?
He was traveling to the Overlook Hotel of The Shining, which, if you've only seen the movie, spoiler alert, blew up. So I just thought that was interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any connection is just catnip for me.
Well, we're in Colorado. I guess we should.
Yeah, I loved that. And my second point is crazy, but hear me out.
All right, let's do this.
This book, Misery, is Paul Sheldon's memoir.
Oh.
This book is... Okay, so in the epilogue, we find out that Misery's Return has been published, and his agent has said, well, what you really need to do is write your story, man. Yeah. Write the story. This is going to be the biggest selling book ever, not just because it's a good book, but because of the story behind how it was written. You write the story of what happened to you, and it will be even better. And Paul says, I never could, because I am a storyteller. If I wrote that book, it wouldn't be the true story. Mm-hmm. It would be my exaggeration.
Yeah, he'd add and change little things here and there, and then it would
my argument is that's what this book is. The finale of this book didn't happen as the way it was written. Several parts of this book don't add up. Annie says at some point, I believe it's during the rat exchange, she's holding it and she's like, see how it struggles to get away. And I'm sure that's what you're thinking too, Paul, but you won't escape. Maybe you would if this was one of your stories, but this isn't. This is real life, and things don't happen that way. And this sentiment is repeated a few times throughout the book. And yet, there are several parts of the book that contradict that. Well, now, that's because this is a book. And this is an insane argument, but hear me out. During the good times, Annie lets Paul out onto the back porch to read.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? What we know of Annie, would it make sense that she would just be like, as paranoid as she is, as completely detached and terrified of her neighbors, that she would just be like, yes, please, go outside?
Yeah, I did think that was really weird.
I don't think so. Annie has a sweet tooth. She loves sweets. When she's in her depressive episode, she eats tons of candy. When he sneaks into her pantry, there's just sweet food everywhere. When she has caviar to celebrate the end of the book, she hates it. But she also licks rat blood from her fingers. But that touch is so unreal. It is
exaggerated.
So exaggerated, like it's a novel. And finally, when Paul does make his big escape, it's a set piece. He's this malnourished, weak man. Sure, he's been lifting the typewriter to keep his arms strong, but he sets himself on fire, basically. He says that, like, he sets it on fire on his lap, on the table that is resting on his wheelchair. He picks up the typewriter to throw at her, and it's on. Fire is dripping from it. He beats this woman who he is constantly described as just this solid brick of muscle, and a hobbled, defeated man brings her down, and she still gets away like the monster in a horror movie, crawls away to get a chainsaw. The idea that Paul got away, and what better way to get back at Annie than to write this book, turning her into this overblown, over-the-top monster for all the Roidmans in the world. I just really like that idea.
I'm on board.
Yeah, I say
I'm
yes.
sold.
Right?
That's canon.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I'll keep it short and sweet. Okay, 5 out of 5. I told you guys when we finished the first half, I texted our group chat, this might be my favorite book. Full stop. Like, not just favorite King book. This book is perfect, action-packed. The characters are amazing. It's perfect. 5 out of 5.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I love everything about this book. It was so exciting. It was so cool, and I didn't expect so much, and I didn't expect I was going to love it as much as I did. So 5 out of 5.
This book goes down in history as one of my favorite Stephen King books. I'm so happy to be able to find a favorite Stephen King book again because I thought I found them all.
Right?
Yeah, so I'd have to give it 5 out of 5 blue chambray shirts.
Hell yes.
Hell we go. All right, that's it for this episode of Derry Public Radio. As always, thank you for listening. Please join us in our next episode where we will be watching the movie Misery. For Benjamin Graham and CM Alexander, I'm Joshua Kahn, reminding you that if you want to be a writer, the only real requirement is that ability to remember the story of every scar.
Hey everyone, CM Alexander here. What do you guys think of Ben's theory that Misery is Paul's embellished story about his time with Annie? Tell us on our Facebook and Instagram at Derry Public Radio or Twitter at Derry Public, or send your theories to our email, derrypublicradio@gmail.com. And please like and subscribe to us on iTunes, and if you wouldn't mind, please leave us a review. That's how we move up the iTunes ladder and get noticed by other listeners. Isn't it funny how Ben totally made up a fake news story about me kidnapping Stephen King? Don't worry, Ben. You'll get yours. Nobody messes with the Dragon Lady. Goodbye, listeners.